Very lucky each Saturday to have a chat to Leith Van Onselen, Chief Economist at the MB Fund, MB Super, and one of the founders of macrobusiness.com.au. It's where we go for economic news every day, and there's a lot to unpack today. Leith Van Onselen's on the line. How are you, mate?
G'day, Luke. Great to hear you back.
Thank you. Nice to be back and nice to hear your voice, mate. Boy, we've got some gear to jump into, including, I guess, confirming what we've been talking about now for some time. That is, it's nice to say, let's build 1.2 million homes and the people will come. And then all of a sudden, the housing construction sector hits a wall, no pun intended. And the idea that we're going to build our way out of this drama caused by the immigration from this government, well, that's just a work of fiction now, isn't it?
Yeah, mate, it just keeps getting worse, unfortunately. The whole housing supply situation, it seems like almost every week I talk to you, a new data point comes out and it just keeps getting worse. And unfortunately, this week we received dwelling approvals data for March, and they were once again another absolute shocker. So in trend terms, that's once you take out all the monthly volatility, it's the ABS's preferred measure. Only 12,500 homes were approved for construction in March, which was the worst monthly result since April 2012. Now, just to put that into perspective, that result's about 40% below the Albanese government's housing target, which requires 20,000 homes per month to be built to hit that 1.2 million target.
Jeez.
And on that monthly run rate, Australia would build only about 150,000 homes a year, which is 90,000 below the Albanese government's target of 2,040,000 homes. So, mate, look, and the thing about it is approvals are actually the forward-looking indicators. So that's basically, you have to approve a home before it actually gets built. So all this tells you is that the construction ahead is collapsing. And that's after, obviously, dwelling completions also collapsed and commencements also collapsed. So it's really bad. And then just to segue that, the next day, the ABS released data on housing finance, and it showed that the number of home loans issued for the construction or purchase of a new home remained at near historical low levels in March. So basically, the last 20 months of new home sales data has been the weakest of any period since records began in 2002. So it's just an absolute shocker. And the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, which is ALBO's new, supply bureaucratic body to monitor this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It released its first State of the Housing report on Friday, and that found, quote, a significant shortfall in supply. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, no, gee, who would have thought?
Yeah.
And the council actually estimated that only 943,000 homes will be built in the next 5 years, which is, what's that? That's 257,000 below ALBO's target. And as a result, we're going to have significant deterioration in rising house prices, rising rents, bigger housing shortages, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And the hilarious thing about this, Luke, is that there's another government body called the National Housing Finance Investment Corporation, and they also do an annual report. And I went back and looked at their one during the height of the pandemic when net overseas migration was, had collapsed. And in 2020, they tipped that we'd have 100,000 housing surplus by this year.
Oh, wow.
By next year, I think it was.
Yeah.
Because they projected lower immigration going forward. So instead, we've had this huge record rebound in immigration, 550,000 in a year. It's going to continue to go strong by the looks of it. And another government body is now tipping a massive shortage. And all that tells you is that it's basically an immigration problem because, when immigration collapsed, they were tipping a massive surplus and an oversupply of housing. Now that immigration is running at record levels, they're now tipping a massive shortage. And unfortunately, if you're a long-suffering renter out there, it just means that the situation is just going to keep getting worse. You're going to have rising rents and be forced to live in group housing, all the usual stuff we talk about every week. And it's just an appalling situation. It's going to keep continuing until the government takes the foot off the pedal and cuts immigration.
Or until we get the opposition serious on this issue, speaking up, because I think, as you and I both know, this does resonate, this issue. People have a real problem with it because everyone knows someone who rents, and what you used to be able to afford is just way out of reach these days. I tell you what, mate, if the Prime Minister retains his form, as he blamed his council around these detainees being out and bashing up grandparents in Perth, he'll have a crack at this National Housing Supply and Affordability Council next. They'll cop the blame for Albo. So if you're on that council get in first and quit. There's no future there for you. What about the cost of living crisis? We've had some inflation numbers out. Warren Hogan from Judo Bank, he certainly got some attention through the course of the week. What do you make of this, and where do you think we are in terms of interest rate hikes or reductions?
Yeah, so listeners might recall about a week ago we got the higher than expected inflation for the March quarter, and that basically led to a whole bunch of economists tipping rate hikes. And I think Warren Hogan was the most bullish. He basically thought we'd have 3 rate hikes this year. I think the data that's come out this week by the ABS has put a massive wet blanket on that, put that to rest. So on Tuesday, the Bureau of Statistics released retail sales data, which unexpectedly fell by 0.4% in March. Economists were tipping a 0.2% rise. But the bigger data point there is that retail sales are only up 0.8% year on year. Now, you might be listening to this and thinking, oh, that's growth, that's okay. The problem with it is it was actually the lowest annual growth outside the pandemic since 2000. So that's in 24 years.
Yeah.
And once you strip out our very high population growth of 2.5% and inflation of 3.6%, what it tells you is that basically per head, we've cut retail sales by 5% in the last year. And that's on the back of a 6% decline in household disposable income last year, which was the biggest fall in the world. So effectively, households have been squeezed, their incomes have fallen, and as a result, they're cutting back on spending. That's exactly what you'd expect. And the reason why this puts a wet blanket on rate hikes is because household spending is 60% of economic growth. So if that falls, it means the economy's, we're already in a per capita recession. It just means it's probably going to get worse. And I can't see the RBA hiking into that.
Right.
Into such a weak, consumer recession. And just to put a bow on that one, on how hard households are doing it.
Yeah.
The Australian Bureau of Statistics released a cost of living index this week for the year to March. And what it showed is that for employee households, which is most of us, so anyone who basically is a working household, their cost of living rose by 6.5% in the year to March, which is, that's nearly double the inflation rate of 3.6%. It's, well over the 4% wage growth. So effectively, households' cost of living is rising a lot faster than inflation and incomes. And it's just another way that households are getting squeezed. And that it basically gets down to, these soaring mortgage costs, soaring rents, energy prices, those sorts of things. So, yeah, to cut a long story short, I just can't see the RBA hiking rates into that sort of economy when you got the household sector getting absolutely smashed, which is the main driver of the economy. So I think the next move's still down. It's just whether or not it comes, end of the year or early next year.
So that'll be comforting for lots of people with a mortgage who helped Australia through this thing by having their rates hiked through the roof. This cost of living number in the year to March of 6.5%. Why is that higher than inflation? Those things aren't in that inflation basket, are they?
No. So the inflation, the CPI doesn't count mortgage payments. So as a result, it's not factoring in the huge increase in mortgage rates. So Australian households, unfortunately, have suffered the biggest rise in mortgage repayments, actually second biggest after Norway, but one of the biggest rises in the world in mortgage repayments. And the reason for that is because about 85% of our mortgages are variable rate mortgages, and those that aren't are short-term fixed, so usually 3 years or less. And what that's meant is that the RBA's rate hikes have just been passed straight on to households as costs who've got mortgages, whereas overseas with fixed rate mortgages, they don't get hit by their rate hikes. And so that's basically the difference. It's the mortgage increased mortgage payments which aren't captured in the CPI.
Please tell me taxpayers in New South Wales and Queensland aren't bailing out the hapless Victorian government. Surely not.
Mate, look, so just so listeners know, I'm a Melburnian, right? So I'm about to go absolutely ham on Victoria here. So it's coming from a resident.
We know you mentioned you're from Melbourne. We don't mind that you mention it. Just don't mention it too often, would you mind?
That's right, mate. It's an absolute basket case.
Yes.
So the Victorian government is basically drowning in debt, to no end. So it's so much worse. It's got the lowest credit rate in the country. It's got the most debt. S&P Global, which is the largest credit rating agency, predicts Victoria to have an absolute explosion in debt, much higher than any other jurisdictions. And there's principally 3 reasons for that. First of all, the Victorian government has borrowed massively on massive infrastructure projects. I know New South Wales has as well, but every one of those projects has basically had huge cost blowouts. They're of spurious. Some of them are just, white elephants, like the suburban rail loop. Infrastructure experts don't want it. They say it's a $200 billion wasteful project. They're going to build it anyway. So they're getting smashed there. Victoria's public sector's grown by 59% in the last 15 years,
Jeez.
which is against population growth of 29%.
Oh, mate.
So it's had it's insane. It's had the biggest blowout of public servants. And get this, Luke, Victoria's public service pay bill has increased by 152% over the last 15 years.
Oh, goodness me.
Which is just insane. And then we've just cancelled the Commonwealth Games, have lost $600 million there for games that nobody wanted in Victoria. It's an absolute Mickey Mouse affair. And we've just cancelled that. We're going to cost $600 million bill. And the sad thing is the federal government has just effectively bailed Victoria out by giving them $3.8 billion in additional GST, whereas New South Wales has lost nearly $200 million, $188 million, which is just insane. So they're basically robbing New South Wales and the other states to basically bail out Victoria. And the scary thing about this is a former federal Treasury official, Stephen Anthony, is pretty well respected. He's tipped that Victoria is going to require a full-blown federal bailout because its debt's so bad. So in addition to the GST, just direct financial transfers. And just to quote some of what he said in the AFR, he said, quote, Victoria is on a suicide mission to record borrowing, just as global interest rates are about to hit 5%. Potholes can't be filled. Emergency departments can't afford clean linen. Primary schools can't fix heaters. Things are about to get very ugly. So effectively what he said is that Victoria's budget is so wrecked that it's going to require a federal bailout, which just basically means that, we're all taxpayers here. It means that residents of all other states, and most notably New South Wales, because you've got the biggest population, are going to potentially be required to bail out the Victorian government again, which I think is pathetic.
Lovely. What a joke. What a joke. No one holds them. Well, look, the people should hold them to account. Many of us from outside Victoria looked at, and look, I understand that Matthew Guy, as an opposition leader, in my opinion, is hopeless, way out of his depth, and shame on the coalition for not organising better and having a serious opposition. But that government, the one we're talking about now, who is responsible for all of this, just got another 4 years, didn't they, last year?
Mate, and they've got an increased majority. It is absolute.
It's a joke.
The Victorians, it's actually quite a hard place to live sometimes, because you talk to people, and if you said anything bad about Dan Andrews, or now he's left, but it's Jacinta Allen, they just bite your head off. Like it is Stockholm syndrome down here. It's a cult.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why Victorians support these clowns.
Yes.
And then defend everything they do. Like we got, locked down for 9 months. There was incompetence left, right and centre there. We've just blowouts everywhere in infrastructure, waste. There's now, my mum had to go to hospital last week, and we went private. So we wait 8 hours in emergency just to get seen. It's just, you're reading about people dying in emergency waiting for care. It's just an absolute basket case down here. And yet the government always gets voted in.
It's amazing. Stay well, mate. Hope your mum's okay too. Talk to you next week.
Oh, no, she's fine, by the way. Yeah,
good on you.
Now.
Good to know that.
Thanks, Leith.
Thank you, Leith. All the best, mate. Leith Van Onselen, macrobusiness.com.au. And, of course, we've got the Clayton's COVID inquiry going on. I mean, what a stitch-up this is. With all the people that died and the lockdowns, the cost of the money we spent supporting people who might otherwise have lost their jobs, you'd have a full-on inquiry, wouldn't you? You'd have a full-on inquiry so that if something like this was to happen again, we'd be better at nailing it. We were so busy convincing ourselves, oh, look, we've locked up to keep everyone safe. How good. Don't go to Kmart, bloody hell, you might die. All that kind of gear. So let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at why nearly 800 people died in the hotel quarantine in Victoria. You know what they did? During the week, they said to that COVID inquiry, well, no, they've already had an inquiry in Victoria. Remember the amnesia inquiry? Oh, who approved that? Don't know, can't remember. From the Premier and others. So because that's been held, they're going to use that evidence. They're not going to reinvestigate anything. This is a stitch-up. This is a stitch-up. It's just... I know. I know Peter Dutton's talking about potentially a royal commission into domestic violence, and I'm sure the government, with their 11 media advisors who wouldn't know the difference between a cactus and a piece of juicy fruit chewing gum, they'll have, quick, you better do one of them. Dutton's doing it. They should be condemned for the way they've conducted this or the way they've put together this COVID inquiry.